Good evening and welcome to the Daily News Roundup. I am Abigail Smythe. Among the stories in this evening's newscast, a 23-year-old charged in relation to triple killing. Man struck and killed by van in St. Elizabeth. His brother taken into custody. Decomposing body of 35-year-old hotel worker found home in Hanover. Audit flags $400 million expense at Ministry of Health. Police search for 4 gunmen in relation to abduction, sexual assault and robbery off Malines Road. In business, global services sector boasts 270% increase in job creation over the last 5 years. In the region, Dominica's main opposition will not contest December's snap general election. Further overseas, control of the U.S. House and Senate still up in the air as votes tally neck and neck. And in sports, the Jamaica Football Federation receives a 27-seater bus through sponsorship. Now for the news in detail. A man was struck and killed by a van in Lititz, St. Elizabeth Monday night. He is 30-year-old Renroy Francis. Francis's brother has since been taken into police custody. Reports are that Francis had incurred a bill in his brother's name at a bar. The owners of the bar had approached the brother to settle the bill, triggering an argument between the two. Francis left to go home and his brother reportedly followed him. Reports later emerged that Francis had been run over by a van. The brother reportedly fled the scene and was eventually held by cops in Spanish Town, St. Catherine. He has not yet been officially charged. The search is now on for 4 gunmen who went to a premises off Malines Road and reportedly abducted a male, sexually assaulted a female, and also robbed several people of their valuables on Tuesday. Reports are that the men went to the location, said to be a tenement settlement, in a marked taxi. Residents were tied up and beaten by the men, who then stole money and appliances, including a 50-inch television set, along with several other valuables from the premises. There are also reports emerging that a female at the premises was sexually assaulted by the criminals before they made their escape from the location. The police were later called to the location and a search was launched for the criminals. Residents in the area say the incident has left them traumatized. A 35-year-old hotel worker identified as Judine Smith Grayson was found dead in Longwood District, Hanover, Tuesday afternoon. She was a chef at a hotel in Negril. Reports are that about 12:15 p.m., residents noticed a foul odor coming from the house and summoned the police. Upon their arrival, Smith Grayson's body was seen lying on the floor with several stab wounds. It was in a state of decomposition. The scene was processed and the body removed to the morgue pending a post-mortem. Following several leads and police operations to apprehend the deceased woman's husband, who is a suspect in her murder, he turned himself in to the Maypen police in Clarendon early Wednesday morning. Arrangements are now being made for him to be interviewed. Rushane Patterson, who was named a person of interest in the death of social media influencer Anika Slikiana Townsend, has not been charged in relation to her death. He was questioned on Tuesday in the presence of a lawyer who sat in on behalf of his attorney, Michelle Thomas. Patterson was reportedly asked direct questions about Townsend, to which he responded with general answers. He remains behind bars as a result of being charged last week with abduction and assault in connection with a 2018 incident. A 23-year-old man has been charged following an incident in Bedward Gardens, August Town, Kingston on Saturday, April 7, 2022. Charged is Marvin Walker, otherwise called Junior, and Crocodile, a vendor of August Town Road. Walker is charged with wounding with intent, illegal possession of firearm and ammunition, and 3 counts of murder. Reports from the Halfway Tree Police are that about 4:40 p.m., a group of men were standing at a shop when men armed with rifles and handguns pounced upon them and opened gunfire, killing 3 of them and injuring another. The deceased were later identified as 21-year-old Kevin Jackson, otherwise called Kids Friday, 24-year-old Rashid Edwards, otherwise called Boppy, and 18-year-old Keena Ray, otherwise called Brain, all of Bedwood Gardens, Kingston 7. Following the incident, an investigation commenced and the search began for Walker. He was arrested in October when he was denied entry to Panama. He was taken into custody on his return to Jamaica on Monday, October 31, and later charged. His court date is being finalized. A murder convict from St. Anne is attempting to convince the Court of Appeal to shorten a 20-year period he must serve as part of his life sentence before parole. The 29-year-old laborer, Neville Lewis, beheaded a man and set fire to his body after allegedly accusing him of passing on an HIV/AIDS infection. He also inflicted multiple chop and stab wounds to the now deceased Burnett Thomas. Lewis had reportedly enlisted the help of Thomas's lover, Howard Ricketts, in the gruesome 2012 killing. Lewis pleaded guilty to the murder in May 2014 in the sentence-based circuit court and was sentenced the following month to life in prison with a stipulation that he served 20 years before becoming eligible for parole. The killer subsequently took issue with the sentence and filed an appeal. The lone grounds on which the challenge was initiated is that the trial judge erred in failing to adequately demonstrate how he arrived at the sentence and whether he applied the relevant principle in sentencing the appellant. The early morning murder took place at Lewis's home in Brownstown, St. Anne on March 25, 2012. On the day of the incident, Lewis and Thomas were at home when they had an argument around 4 a.m. after Lewis reportedly accused Thomas of giving him the disease. During the quarrel, Lewis retrieved a machete from under the bed and chopped Thomas several times. The attack moved from the bedroom to the living room, where Thomas was chopped on the neck, resulting in him falling to the ground. Lewis, with the help of Ricketts, a security guard, dragged the injured man back into the bedroom and put him on the bed. They both chopped and stabbed him multiple times. Lewis then decapitated Thomas and placed the head in a rice bag before setting the bed on fire with the body. The police were summoned and Thomas's headless body was found on a mattress after the blaze was extinguished. The dead man's decomposed head was found 4 days later near a manhole in Orange Hill District, Brownstown, after a witness detected the stench and went to investigate. Both men were arrested and charged. In a caution statement, Lewis told the police that he killed Thomas after he asked him to perform oral sex. Meanwhile, Ricketts, who pleaded not guilty to murder, was found guilty in November 2016 and was similarly sentenced to life in prison in 2017. Ricketts, in his unsworn statement, testified that he witnessed Lewis chopping Thomas following an argument and that Lewis ordered him to take part in the act. He admitted that he assisted Lewis to pull Thomas to the bedroom, where he then inflicted stab wounds to the chest and intestinal area with a machete. Ricketts reportedly said to the police, quote, "Officer, the boy never caused this for me. Him say me fi help him and look what happened," end quote. Amid the current upsurge in crime and violence in Jamaica, veteran dancehall artist and producer Demarco announced that he will no longer record songs supporting or glorifying guns. His decision stems from his support of the Broadcasting Commission's ban on music that promotes scamming, drugs, guns, and other illegal activities on local airwaves. The artist says given the increase in violence in Jamaica, the time has come for those in authority as well as public figures to be more proactive in helping to stem the bloodshed. Demarco also shares the view that the violent content in certain songs has significantly contributed to the decay in society. His social media post calling for the change gained the support of his colleagues in music, including Ioctane, Sean Paul, and Gramps Morgan. Auditor General Pamela Monroe Ellis has highlighted weaknesses in the Ministry of Health's procurement and expenditure of hundreds of millions of dollars in the country's COVID-19 response. In a compliance audit, Mrs. Monroe Ellis noted that while there were examples of good practices, there was a need for improvement in the procurement and records management processes of the Christopher Tufton-led ministry. The Auditor General pointed to several occasions where even basic contracts were not in place, leaving the government exposed. Mrs. Monroe Ellis noted the importance of using emergency procurement due to the nature of the COVID-19 crisis. She lauded the Ministry of Health for responding to the COVID-19 pandemic early and adopting a proactive approach. However, she says while the ministry was required to act quickly, it failed to maintain even the most basic paper trail to facilitate transparency, accountability, and effectiveness. In one instance, the Health Ministry made payments totaling $337 million to 7 hotels and guest houses to provide quarantine accommodations. But it had a formal contract with only one of the service providers. The 6 service providers without a formal contract were paid a total of $293 million. In the absence of formal terms and conditions, the ministry exposed itself to unbudgeted liability claims and varying payment arrangements. One of the service providers unexpectedly asked the ministry to pay the facility's electricity bill and 90% of water charges. The ministry also paid another of the service providers $3 million for sanitization and cleaning at 3 of the 7 facilities, in addition to the rental payment for the accommodations. The Auditor General says this arrangement was not in keeping with Section 53 of the financial regulations. However, in response to the concerns, the ministry says due to the extremely short time frame, it was not able to negotiate formal contracts with these entities. The ministry was also chided by the Auditor General for lacking accountability for amounts transferred to other entities. In one example, it transferred a total of $174 million to the Ministry of Local Government, the National Solid Waste Management Authority, and a non-government organization (NGO) to fund activities to contain the spread of COVID-19. However, it did not implement measures to track the utilization of the funds disbursed. The Auditor General noted that the NGO spent $14 million of the $20 million it received on activities unrelated to the COVID-19 emergency. The Ministry of Health's purchase of fixed assets was also brought into question. A sample of fixed assets purchased totaling $55 million noted that the ministry spent $2 million to purchase 45 televisions and 15 tablets. However, the ministry did not indicate on the purchase records the reasons for acquiring the devices. Consequently, the Auditor General was unable to determine how these acquisitions related to COVID-19 response initiatives. Managing Director of the Housing Agency of Jamaica, HAJ, Dr. Patrick Thelwell, is no longer the head of the agency. Thelwell's employment was terminated on November 4 following the findings of an internal audit. Information Minister Robert Morgan says the former managing director's management practices came into question, causing the agency's board to dismiss him. Minister Morgan says the former director's skill sets may not have been properly aligned to the management needs of the agency. The Information Minister says the agency's board will now have to assess the best way forward in responding to the findings of the audit. Poor management of project cost variations are reportedly among the findings of the audit, and it is understood that the board was not properly informed of the matters. In the meantime, the former managing director, who had been employed at HAJ for 16 months, believes his dismissal was unreasonable. He says his reputation that he has spent decades building has been left devastated by the recent developments. He notes that the media release announcing his termination doesn't give the context, and it was left up to the public to speculate. Dr. Thelwell says the issue of poor management oversight happened 3 levels below him and says he was not informed of the matter. He states that he had signed off on payment certificates of variations on a project without the proper supporting documentation, adding that the due diligence should have been at the feet of the technical people with such experience. He says a total of 3 people have already resigned in connection to the project. He says though he is not considering any legal action, he is seeking to clear his name. In the meantime, Chief Technical Director in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, Doreen Prendergast, is now at HAJ as Interim Managing Director until a new director is recruited. The findings of the audit are also expected to be made public. The government is seeking to add an additional $60 billion to fund its budget for the 2022 to 2023 fiscal year. This is due to rising inflation and ongoing disruptions in the international financial markets. Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clark made the announcement during the tabling of the first supplementary estimates in the House of Representatives on Tuesday. Earlier this year, Parliament approved a $912 billion budget. However, Dr. Clark says the unexpected surge in inflation and the ongoing international supply chain crisis, caused firstly by the COVID-19 pandemic and then the Russia-Ukraine conflict, forced the administration to find new funding for social intervention programs to cushion the blow on Jamaicans. Of the $60 billion increase in the budget, $21.1 billion has been set aside for public sector wages. Dr. Clark says an expected increase in revenue of $65.5 billion should offset the rise in expenditure. He says these increased inflows are due to the higher than anticipated recovery of the economy from the impact of COVID-19 as well as higher than expected inflation. At the end of September 2022, the total revenues were $40.4 billion above budget, including $35 billion from tax revenue. Dr. Clark notes that this improved performance has been factored into the current economic forecast, which now anticipates total revenue flows of $815.5 billion for the current 2022-23 fiscal year. The first supplementary estimates have been sent to the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee for review. And the government is spearheading the investment of approximately $124 billion to build a new 4-lane highway from Rose Hall in Montego Bay, St. James to Miami Bay in St. Anne. The International Monetary Fund subsidiary International Finance Corporation (IFC) has been engaged by the government to design and execute what is expected to be Jamaica's first public-private partnership road project. A financial advisor services agreement was signed by Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clark and IFC Managing Director Mokhtar Diop in Washington, D.C. on October 13. According to Minister of State in the Office of the Prime Minister West, Homer Davis, the expansion of the existing roadway from 2 lanes to 4 will eradicate the congestion currently experienced by motorists traversing the busy North Coast corridor. Davis says that this project is an example of the big-ticket investments being carried out by the government. Another such investment is the $274.5 million Montego Bay Perimeter Road project, for which ground was broken in July. In business news, the global services sector is boasting a 270% increase in the number of jobs created in Jamaica over the last 5 years. Acting Deputy Director at the Heart NSTA Trust, Dr. Marcia Rowe Amondi, says the sector has gained more than 46,000 jobs in the country to date. Dr. Rowe Amondi says the sector is the fastest growing employment creator in the country. She points out that the growth was due to an increase in the number of firms in the sector. She says the sector, which started out with 143 apprentices, now has more than 3,400, and adds that the growth of the sector must not only rely on lower level jobs. And in the region, the main opposition United Workers' Party in Dominica says it will not contest the December 6 snap general election. The party says it remains convinced that the electoral reform, as demanded by the Dominican population, is needed to facilitate free and fair elections. With the nomination day set for November 18, the party is calling for President Charles Savarin to revoke the calling of the election. In a statement, the United Party says it views with disappointment and dismay the pronouncement by the Prime Minister to hold a snap general election. It says this call for national elections is seen as an outrage to all Dominicans, especially the residents of the east of the country who were reeling under the impact of a natural disaster. And on the international scene, control of the U.S. House and Senate was still up in the air Wednesday morning as states across the country tallied votes in neck and neck for the midterm election races. A set of close contests will determine whether Democrats keep their slim majorities in the House and Senate, or if Republicans will seize control of one or both chambers in the legislature. The balance of power may take days or even weeks to determine, especially in the Senate, where Georgia's race could be headed for a runoff in early December. It is estimated that Republicans could end up with the 220 seats, a narrow majority in the House. And in sports news, the national senior women's football team hosted their first training session on Tuesday ahead of two friendly internationals against Paraguay. The first match will be at Catherine Hall Stadium on Thursday and the second set for the National Stadium on Sunday. Assistant coach of the Reggae Girls, Xavier Gilbert, says the players are in good shape. The Jamaicans are using the games as part of their preparation for the World Cup in New Zealand and Australia in July 2023. Meanwhile, Paraguay will be using the match to prepare for their World Cup qualifying campaign next year. And the Jamaica Football Federation, JFF, has received a 27-seater bus from Jamaica Equipment Company, a subsidiary of the Stewart's Automotive Group. The sponsorship comes following recent calls from President Michael Ricketts for more corporate support. The King Long bus, valued at $7.3 million Jamaican dollars, was handed over to the JFF on Tuesday. Additionally, for a year, JFF will provide a driver and fuel, while the bus will be fully insured and maintained by Jamaica with an option to renew. Newly appointed JFF General Secretary Dennis Chung highlights that Stewart's Automotive's support of the JFF over the years has been key to the continued development of local football. And that's it for your news roundup for today. I am Abigail Smythe. See you next time.